Hi everyone, in this video I'll be talking about how can you manage your clients better. Now this takeaways from this video is based from the book The Trusted Advisor that was written for consultants, negotiators and advisors when it comes to working with different clientele. Now, the reason why this book was written also is partly because it's so important to understand different client archetypes based if you're working in the client servicing industry. And the reason why you want to do that is because when you can understand different client archetypes, it helps you to tailor your approach to manage your clients' concerns, manage their way of thinking around the project and about you as an advisor, and also helps build stronger relationships. The ultimate result of this ability to understand your clients also directly impacts the fact that will your client sign or renew the contract with you? Will they agree when your professional fees increase? Do they see your perceived value as the advisor to be extremely high and therefore they want to work with you? And sometimes that in might also make your life a little bit easier when it comes to your clients being very ready to take on the suggestions you've accepted. So I will start with different client archetypes then. The first archetype is just the facts client. Now, before that, I realized that when you're dealing with different client archetypes in your entire professional career, sometimes the knowledge we have about how to handle different client archetypes come from our seniors in our jobs, come from maybe discussing with another person in the previous team that handles particular client scope of work, asking them like how's this client, and then based on any past information, then you try to sort of work with it and then figure out like what do you need to do for the client. And I realized that having the ability and the skill to read the client very quickly in terms of understanding what is it that they want, what they actually mean by what they say, and how then you are able to address your communication to handle their objections or their concerns, right? Directly impacts the way your client perceives you. So the faster you're able to do that, I believe that skill also helps in the way your client accepts your ideas or suggestions or even solutions, and also maybe lowers their resistance whenever they're working with you. So I'll move on to the first archetype, which is just effects client. So this kind of client actually is very straight to the point, direct, demanding, or perhaps even come across as rude. Comes across as very aggressive, asking a lot of direct questions and focusing on price and efficiency. And sometimes when we go dig a one deeper layer, sorry, one layer deeper, actually what the client's actually meaning is that they want to feel understood and in control. And sometimes the reason for their directness is because they're trying to mask their insecurity or they fear of being taken advantage of, or they have PTSD based on working with previous advisors that promised the world to them but never actually delivered. So now, when they have bad experiences with other advisors, that's when they come to any engagement and then they have this PTSD. And unfortunate as it is, sometimes it's like once they get over the PTSD after having a great working relationship with you as advisor, then it's when you get more ability to influence them. And sometimes the reason why they ask very direct questions is because um, maybe their choice of vendors or even advisors is also a question they must justify internally. So whenever they're focusing on price and efficiency, this is one way for them to justify internally that the however amount we are paying to this advisor, we are fully maximizing the value and getting more benefit than what we're paying for. So one way of how to respond sometimes is that with this kind of clients is to not be put up by their tone and to also understand that if they're very direct and concise, then sometimes mirroring back the communication back to them by also being direct and concise, but also polite and professional, make sure lets them know that you understand where they're coming from and you are there to deliver value in the shortest time possible in that sense when it comes to your communication. And also, I think what's important is when you clarify and confirm their needs, it's when they, it's when it's when you sort of re-emphasize in their mind that you are trying to understand them. So I think with clients that are very straight to the point, the more important thing for them is that does the advisor know that I have this KPI, I need to meet this KPI, it's very important and how can we get there? So if you're able to clarify and confirm their needs and also this target goal, that's when you realize to them that what is valuable to them is also important to you and you understand the importance. And when you do that, you're actually showing them that you understand their values. Again, it's efficiency, it's control, it's benefit. So I move on to the next client archetype, which is I'll get back to you client. So sometimes when you are going through this client engagement and then you suggest a few things, and then you tend to realize that this client may not be able to make the decision on the spot, and not because that they need further information, but sometimes this client has this tendency to tell you, I'll get back to you. What they might actually be saying is that they are hesitating when it comes to committing, and they can't make decisions on the spot. And that could also mean a few things, that the task or the decision that need to come to confirmation with you might mean that they also need to check in internally how are their internal stakeholders relying on this piece of information that you're providing to them, for example, or what are the things that they need to confirm internally to get everybody internally stakeholder to align that what solutions you're provided works for everybody in the room. So in this case, with managing this client, I think it's that understanding that they are likely cautious is because they want to avoid making mistakes, and they want to consider things carefully. And if they need to work with internal stakeholders, every, for example, report information that they are getting from you needs to be aligned with their internal stakeholders if that is the exact way that they also find the information or report useful. So I think that this is a bit of a tricky thing when working with a person in charge directly, by realizing the person in charge actually has to answer to different stakeholders that have different ways of how they want things to be presented. Or let's say if they are the internal stakeholders are wanting to conduct things in such a way that if your person in charge is on leave or MC or whatsoever, that anything that you have lies your person in charge can easily be understood by that internal stakeholder. That's when I think there's a lot of time spent by your client sometimes is to get the internal alignment. And the reason why is because when a lot of people are relying on a piece of work that you have done, but they may not be in the call with you on a weekly or a monthly basis, their expectation still is that no matter what, I must be able to understand the piece of document that you have given to this person in charge you're working with. And then for this engagement to, or for this advisor to be, considered long term with the company. And how do you respond to this kind of situation sometimes is to recognize and respect your client's need for time. And one way around it sometimes is to think proactively based on your client's response time. Let's say, a decision that you could get within like a couple of days, if they're stretching to a week or two for certain things, maybe you need to start the conversation earlier with your client. uh, Maybe go on a proactive approach, or even prod your client to think, maybe should we start this conversation earlier with you? Do you need additional time? I think the value of an advisor sometimes is to anticipate or to understand when the client needs additional time to factor that into the entire project. And when you're able to think proactively from that direction, and I admit that this is sometimes a huge ask for working with advisors, because if they're dealing with multiple clients, then sometimes that thinking ahead for their clients sometimes will require a lot of time as well, or a lot of brain power, and that's not easy. um, I think the ultimate reason why you do that is that when you realize certain decision making, especially bigger things when it comes to reviewing performances, when it comes to justifying certain things, right? When you build in the decision making time into your when you present the data, that's when you can manage the workload sometimes with clients. I think sometimes clients, they, as much as they can, sometimes they might miss the boat when it comes to being more proactive in terms of buffering for decision making time. So, for example, let's say you send a report in, and maybe they have to look through it internally first, and then after that, they have to cascade down to their internal stakeholders, and that might eat some time. So, by the time they get back to you with the approved decision internally, that might be what, a couple of days or even a few weeks. And again, it eats back into the project. How does the project timeline work? And personally, I think that clients may sometimes want their advisors to take a very proactive approach in factoring that in. So as long as you're able to come from a position of advising them, telling them like, hey, should we start this process earlier? Perhaps in a way they're looking for process improvements. I know this sounds a bit strange because sometimes when we sign on to an engagement with a client, we sign on to do a certain scope of work, but also I think I'm not sure whether this might be also something that is a little bit difficult from the client side, is that Sometimes their subconscious ask is for you to navigate or manage things to the point where they can rely solely on you, and they almost can remove their hands from the pot of having to do with this project to a certain degree. So they're relying on you to call the shots, and that might come across sometimes as, I don't know whether it may come across as doable from a managing the client perspective, or may come across as, both parties need to play that role 50-50. So the client needs to also be cognizant of the fact when they might need something. At the same time, they don't take into account that you might need some time before proposing things to them. So I think it no longer becomes a advisors should manage the client relationship, but more of both parties should play their role to manage this client and advisor relationship 50-50 in that case. So one of the suggestions based on how to manage this problem is that telling your client that if you can give the heads up to your client to start certain processes early, or start certain questions early internally, and then let's say you have to present information and you go like, okay, here's the information. I understand you need time to consider this. Here are summary of the key points. Feel free to reach out if you need have any questions. I'm happy to help. When you go via this method of approach, I feel that you have already understood that client needs time to consume the information, number one. Number two, review it. Number three, get internal buy-in. That's when sometimes your client will start to figure out that you have understood the challenges that they face internally within the organization. And I think that when clients feel they're being understood by their advisors, and they feel the advisors have managed to intuitively factor time into their process of their entire project that they're working with, your client gets elevated, sorry, your advisor becomes an elevated partner. They no longer become just a vendor that's supposed to provide a solution to you and they get paid. Suddenly you're considering them as a long-term partner that you need to retain whenever you want any project. And I think that that does volumes for, I think, advisors when it comes to, how do they secure clients in a very long term. I think it's not just about doing the work and doing the work well. It's sometimes about understanding how do you navigate problems that can crop up in a project, and that sometimes is from the client side, which is delay in client approval. I move on to the next client archetype, which is the archetype of you are the expert dummy. So I think this is probably the most one of the most hardest client archetypes. It's when your client is very demanding. They expect you to have all the answers. They may act impatient or condescending, like you're supposed to know everything. And end of the day, they are very hungry to hear like, what's your answer? You're the expert. Tell me what to do. And what's worse is that depending on what kind of setup you're in, whether you are let's say in an agency you're managing multiple clients, and then this scope of work gets passed to you from somebody else, or you take on this scope of work from, as a fresh client, the client is almost wants to hear like, okay, what's your value, and they want to see the value add immediately whenever they talk to you. My take on it is this particular client, I think, is very much on the ball of wanting to hear more value come out from you, and also sometimes not to excuse the behavior, but sometimes also means that they might be insecure, they might be feeling pressured by internal management to show that there's a lot of value from engaging with you as advisor, or just having a bad day. I think sometimes the challenge of being in the client servicing industry and you're dealing with multiple clients is that your ability to switch on and switch off, based on the different clients you're working with, the ability to sort of not fight with your client, but be professional at the same time, quickly address the issue, and able to give the solution and able to put out fire. Sometimes it's truly a challenge, and it's not an easy one. And I feel that with this kind of client, the moment you're able to demonstrate a few of your ability to think things very quickly through, for example, let's say they throw you a problem and then you just say like, okay, we have option one, option two, option three. Based on option one, option two, option three, what should we be what do we propose, and what are the pros and cons for each option? Having said that, what you're trying to demonstrate to them very quickly is that you have the technical know-how, you have the ability to think very quickly on your feet and give solutions, and also this allows you to address their need for immediate answers. I think that this kind of client tends to be the type that are slightly aggressive. They are pushing for results, and the reason why they might be also pushing for results also could mean sometimes they are heavily measured on results. So it could be a part and parcel of a personality thing, and also part and parcel of the scope or the industry they work in that does push a certain level of pressure to have answers quickly, to pivot very quickly, to understand what do we need to do to pivot, and also make decisions on what do we need to pivot. So how you can structure your response to this kind of clients is that saying that, okay, I understand you want a solution quickly. I've seen similar situations with the clients I've dealt with previously, but each client is actually unique. So here are a few approaches we could consider, and to determine the best fit for your situation, I'd like to understand a few more details. The reason why you would structure your answer this way is to say that, number one, I understand that you have a need, and this is a time sensitive need. And I have past experience with doing other clients that can help you, that could help us in this problem shooting exercise. However, here are a few solutions that you could potentially consider if you're in a time crunch. However, to give you the best answer to fit your situation that completely addresses your concern, I need to have more information so that I can help you address this concern very effectively. And when anyone questions you on this solution internally, you're able to 100% justify this, and it's a very airtight case. This is where I think that when you give an answer that's very airtight, solid, the way you address your client's concern makes the client think like, oh, okay, this person I'm working with understands my need for speed. But at the same time, they also want to be thoughtful whenever they give me a solution that no one that questions this solution will then question my ability to assess things. So in a way, you're sort of addressing a client's insecurity of being challenged internally. So I think that based on this book, there were other client archetypes, and these were the top three archetypes I've actually come across that I think were quite valuable, or I personally have seen ways of how other colleagues have adequately addressed these concerns and how they managed to pivot those concerns. So these were the things I felt were quite valuable and perhaps quite common when it comes to dealing with clients per se. So I would like to hear about the many different client archetypes you have come across, and what were the methods you found to be quite valuable in managing the relationship with these different client archetypes. You can leave your comment below